And rather than trying to be like, okay, how can I get that out of the way so that I can teach my robotics? It's like, okay, how can I really support the child in a way that they need? And to support them, you need to work with the stuff that they're actually showing you.
Welcome to the Space Holders Medicine Podcast. We're your hosts, Malvina and Stephanie. This podcast is a sanctuary for space holders to delve into the unique medicine they offer. Each episode will explore their personal journeys, diverse modalities, and the profound experiences that inspire and shape their work. Join us as we uncover the transformative power of their craft. Enjoy! Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Space Holders Medicine Podcast. My name is Stephanie, and together with my co host, Malvina, we are joined here today with our very special guest, Aditya Kapoor. Hi, Adi. He's also known as Adi by his loved ones and people in Singapore specifically. Do people in other places around the world call you Adi as well? Or mostly all in Singapore?
I think a lot of non-Indian people will call me Adi. Yeah.
Got it. So Adi is a trauma-informed educator, entrepreneur, husband, and he identifies as a highly sensitive person or HSP. He started his career as a robotics researcher, developing robots for disaster response missions and earthquake rescue. That's so cool. Through an unexpected series of transitions, today he is deeply passionate about mental well-being, healing, healthy relationships, and also education. So he is the founder of Whyte Labs, an education startup in Singapore that nurtures kids' creativity, sense of empathy, and confidence through advanced robotics projects and also a trauma-sensitive approach. Adi ensures children find a safe space to express themselves, build self-worth, and are mentored by adults attuned to their emotional needs and mental well-being. He is dedicated to helping children grow into emotionally healthy adults, capable of forming meaningful relationships and tapping into their unique gifts. Beyond his work with kids, Adi also supports parents and educators. He hosts circles for parents, educators, and young adults centered around healing, holding space, inner child work, and conscious connections. Much of his work is inspired by his own healing journey with his wife, driving his mission to create emotionally healthy and nurturing spaces for children and their families. So I wonder if you can share with us, Adi, about your journey into space holding and what inspired you to pursue this path, and if there was maybe a moment that felt really significant for you on your journey.
I guess it started with I always wanted to connect deeply with people. I always wanted to, I guess, growing up both as a child and a young adult, I always wanted to share my inner world with people, like have that seen, especially by close friends. Whether it's the ideas I have, my perspective on things, my thoughts, what I'm feeling, the sadness, the happiness, the excitement. But I think I always found it hard to be met, to really be seen. And I think for a large part, it felt like, okay, to be seen, I have to fit into certain boxes that people will get, that people are familiar with. And so I think growing up as a young adult, that was always hard. And for a long time, I got the message that, okay, maybe my authenticity isn't welcome, or maybe even that it's a problem. That if I want meaningful relationships, friendships, then I should, what's the word? I need to filter, I need to, like a garden, you need to groom it, trim it to be a certain way. I think it's only when I finally met my wife that I could finally let those guards down. And I saw that, hey, my vulnerability was actually welcome. And it was scary at first to lower those walls after, more than 2 decades of having to wall up. But finally feeling met when I was vulnerable, seeing that, oh, the person is here to kind of hold me rather than run away the moment I'm vulnerable and the moment I share what's really troubling me, bothering me, what I'm thinking. That was a very big shift. I still remember the first time I shared with my wife when I wasn't feeling good about something. I was sure she'd run away. I was like, okay, you did it again, you're stupid. Now you see she's gonna run away. Everyone told you not to be so vulnerable. But she just sat there and she held me instead. I was like, oh, this is different. And it's nice. And yeah, so I guess that's what really kickstarted the process for me of connecting deeper with myself, with her, and then eventually with family and people I work with and the kids I work with now.
That's really beautiful, Addie. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you to your wife. Yeah. So that being said, I'm very curious. Like, as you learned what space holding was through your wife, how did that understanding of space holding emerge for you? What does it mean for you? And how did you end up integrating that into your life and your work?
I remember when one of the early things my wife said when we got together when we were dating was before we had our first fight or our first conflict or anything, she said, someday we will fight. And so when we do, let's try to approach it as a team where it's us versus the problem rather than us versus each other. I think through that, we try as much as possible to kind of have this awareness of if the other person is hurt or they're triggered with something we did or they're upset, it's likely that there's some younger part, some inner child inside maybe that's hurting, that wants to be seen. Actually, in the early days, probably wasn't even so clear there was an inner child. Maybe it was just some younger part, some tender part. And kind of how could we had this awareness. I don't remember how that started, but this awareness that there's something from the past that's coming up for us here today. So how can we hold that, be with that, and be kind to each other? I think also through that, that was around the same time I started my business as well. And a lot of times when I was struggling with some decisions, I guess connecting also with my values, trying to figure out, okay, how do I want to do this business? Because a lot of the conventional advice can be very monothematic, like, okay, you need to hustle a lot, you need to be ruthless, you need to be this, you need to be that. But it wasn't really what felt good for me. And I think as she got me to reflect on some of those things and kind of connect with what my values really were and help me kind of feel safe and grounded in doing something different from what people conventionally suggest, but that feels good for me, that aligns with me, that I think started shifting things as well. And I was like, wow, this is so beautiful to be able to have someone hold that space. And through that, connecting with what really matters to me, where I can be authentic. Yeah, I think that kind of kickstarted that.
I relate so much to that.
Mm.
There is so much power and healing in expressing our deeper, more hidden parts of ourselves, the parts that you said, we've been conditioned to hide away from the world because when we show these parts, then all our loved ones will run away or they can't handle it. And
Mm.
then for you in that moment to reveal to your wife these parts or this part of yourself and for her to hold you and for you to know that you are okay
Mm.
and you are acceptable and you belong in spite of it's such medicine when someone has done their work enough to be able to hold space for this specific harder more challenging aspects of ourselves.
Yeah, and I think like I guess I what you say brings up two thoughts. Like one is we often talk about holding space in the context of when people are struggling, and that is a very important and big part of it. But I think another part that we don't talk about so much is holding space when people are happy, when they're, for all their creativity, their sparks of joy, imagination, and everything. And I think that also can be very medicinal. I remember like on some of our early few dates, I was just randomly telling her about some ideas I'd been thinking about, like this dishwasher I wanted to build that is like a toaster. You just dip a plate into it in 5 seconds, it's clean, and then you can continue cooking using it. And a lot of my friends otherwise might, they might laugh at my ideas or think like, hey, it's so weird, it's impossible, or just be like, okay. But she took a very genuine interest in it. I think that also kind of, it's not holding space for the sake of it, but also it's about where it comes from, right? A genuine interest, a genuine care. And I think also when we're holding space for the parts of us that are difficult, parts of our loved ones that might be difficult to be with at times, Heather Platt, who talks a lot about holding space, she says it can really take a very fierce commitment to love, to be there, even when it's hurting you so much and it's so confusing and painful, but what kind of makes you want to still show up there? There's a lot of that commitment to love in a way.
Yeah. When you speak about not just holding space for sadness and pain, but also holding space for joy and celebration and to be curious, to bring ourselves into their world, it makes me think of your work with children. So I
Yeah.
wonder if you could describe some of these spaces that you hold and the communities that you serve. What are some maybe common threads that connect these spaces across children and their parents and educators, young adults?
Yeah. And I think like what you say, it's about those childlike parts of us, right? That are dreamy, that are thinking, and I guess like everyone wants to be taken seriously. Like kids want to be taken seriously, you know? Like they might have so many thoughts that might be bizarre, ideas that are bizarre, questions about, adulthood, about life that we think are too complex for them or too, beyond the age. But they're genuinely curious. Like they're genuinely, if we think back to our own childhood, we were dead serious when we wanted to know about, how something works, or when we're thinking, hey, maybe when I grow up, I'll have superpowers, I will, be able to fly, or why can't I go there? Why can't I do this? And I think to a child, it means a lot when someone takes them seriously, especially an adult plays with them, takes them seriously. So I teach kids primarily robotics, in different forms, well, basically building stuff, how basically helping them to materialize ideas that they have around, and basically building something that moves, whether it's a little car-like robot, a spider robot, a boat-like robot. We once did a laundry folding robot, but basically a lot of the core kind of philosophy of how I engage with kids actually comes from entrepreneurship education. And I don't mean the entrepreneurship education in the business world that we're more familiar with. I mean entrepreneurship education for kids, which actually is actually very interesting. The core tenet of entrepreneurship education for kids is, let's say a kid wants to maybe bake muffins and sell at a fair. Okay, maybe they're very ambitious. They think, I'm going to make 200 muffins and sell them for $5 each, $10 each, or sometimes they might say 50 cents each at a fair. And then how can you go, okay, why don't you try? Rather than jumping to tell them, hey, that's not practical. Oh, it's too hard. Do you have enough material? Do you have enough cost? Have you thought of this? And before you know it, the kid doesn't want to do it anymore. But when a child is excited about something, how can you really be there with them in that moment and allow and give space to that excitement and kind of support it? And by support it, I don't mean you come in and do all the work, like work for them, but you let them try, but just kind of have the gentle hand behind them to support the scaffold around them, so that when they struggle, when they fail, or they're down and they realize, maybe it's a night before the fair or 2 days before, and they realize, oh, I never thought of these things. It's so hard. I'm gonna give up. It's impossible. There, how do you then come in to say, hey, it's okay, I got you. Let's see what we can do. Let's figure this out together. So that you kind of teach them to go through the failures together. You teach them that, hey, the struggles are not, the end of it. And there's nothing wrong with you for struggling. It's not, there's nothing bad on your part that maybe you failed or you didn't think of it. But you instead teach them, that's real resilience. You teach them to bounce back from those things, and you teach them not be scared of their ideas. So that's kind of the approach I take with kids whenever they want to build something. I'll have a kid who says, might not know much, but he'll say, I want to build a plane that can fly, I can remote control it, it can shoot missiles or whatever. And I'll be like, okay, let's try, let's start somewhere. And we just start. And then, they just are so excited just to start on it, to feel like someone took me seriously and is here with me. At the end, they might end up with just a little foam plane that doesn't even glide properly, but they're so happy because they went through the process and you were there with them through the process.
That's so wonderful, Adi. I mean, I can relate to the children
Mhm.
because, I've experienced having wild, absurd, bizarre ideas where it's just like met with such an adult perception, like get
Mhm.
real, like be realistic.
I feel like
And
someone's putting
there's
a brick in your face.
yes, exactly. And there's really so much value in, yeah, just being able to hold space for that. And yeah, like you said, being taken seriously and not feel that, your ideas are worthless or your ideas are not worth something exploring. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that and being able to do that for the children.
Mm,
Um, so that brings me to wondering, has there been any challenges that you've encountered as, a space holder for these kids?
mm,
Like, is there another side to it? This is like the
mm.
happy, joyful part, right?
Yeah,
When you're
yeah.
supporting their curiosity. But has there been any incidents? Have there been any incidents where, um, yeah, you've found challenges, or yeah, how do you navigate
Mm.
around them with integrity?
I mean, there've always been challenges. It's a lot of work to get to that space of seeing that creativity finally kind of bloom. When I first started working with kids, the first year was very hard because I didn't really understand much about child psychology then, about childhood development, about trauma, about stress. And at the same time, I'd see all those things showing up in my classroom. I would think initially that, hey, I just need to have something interesting for the kids to work with, an interesting program, curriculum. I'm here to support their ideas, so then we should be doing fun stuff together, right? But, some kids, maybe 10-20% of them will take to that and fly with that, but the majority of them, they might be interested, but they come to class and you just can't get them to do much. They'd be disengaged, they'd be flopping around, they'd be fighting, they'd be restless. And for a long time at the start, I was like, what's wrong with these kids? Why are they like that? And, there's this sense of judgment towards them, feeling like, okay, maybe these kids are not interested, maybe I should just turn them away. As I went through my own healing journey and connected with my own inner child and learned more about what the needs of a child are, what's actually going on under the hood for them, how all the stresses they might be facing affect the way they behave, the way they show up, that completely changed the way I saw my students. When they're not cooperating, it shifted from they're giving me a hard time to, oh, they're having a hard time. I can pick up when things are not when things are amiss in the room. I think this part of being highly sensitive. I can feel if the child is uneasy in the room. Sometimes I'd feel like the kids are very unsettled in the room sitting, and have a sense that maybe this kid is getting bullied at school. And I see them, the eyes always darting to the door. If we close the door, they're like, no, no, don't close the door. Or like they just be very low on self-esteem. The moment they struggle with something, they're like, oh, actually, I'm stupid. I can't do this. I'm not capable. When I know they're fully capable. And at the start, I didn't know how to work through all that, how to support them through all of that. And so it was a lot of learning really to connect better with them. One of the things that really helped was actually this book. It's called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. I did not start reading this book to connect better with kids. I I started reading this book because it was recommended to my wife and me by our therapist to connect better with our inner childs and with each other. And then in reading this book, I was like, oh, I work with kids, and I was like, oh, I can see now why so many times the way I engage with kids, it just bounces off them. I think they're starting to focus on the relationship with the kids, building that rapport, and really kind of seeing them as whole people, almost like treating them like adults, but in a mature way, like giving them importance. That started to shift things. And that comes to the second layer, which is once the first layer is they might just not cooperate with you a lot. But the second layer is once you start creating that safe space, they will mask less and then they'll show you what's really going on under the hood. And often it's not pretty. Often, they'll be so dysregulated, they'll be so upset with things. And the thing is, those things are not, rather than seeing those things as problems in the way, it's like, okay, that's the real deal. That's what's really going on for here. And rather than trying to be like, okay, how can I get that out of the way so that I can teach my robotics? It's like, okay, how can I really support the child in a way that they need? And to support them, you need to work with the stuff that they're actually showing you. Maybe they're really low on self-esteem because the parents yelled at them for something. Maybe they didn't do well at school. Maybe they had a fight. Maybe the teachers yelled at them. And if they're showing you all that, if it's coming out in their behavior and you address that, that's what really helps them. And eventually they will be ready to learn, but you need to work through all that to get to them. And so it does take a lot of work, but it can be quite rewarding at the end when you can get to them.
Thank you so much, Adi. It's so tender listening to you share these different experiences. And what comes up for me is how it is that you also tend to your inner child simultaneously, if you do in the classroom. Because when I hear you share about when you're excited to share about something or to teach something and someone appears disinterested or disengaged, it's like the opposite of what we were speaking about earlier, right? Whereby a kid is so excited to build an airplane that fires missiles and then you encouraging that. But when the tables are turned
Mm.
and they are disengaged and not interested, and obviously, like the adult mind will know, oh, I think something is deeper here. But
Mm.
in that moment, or even when you shared earlier about how sometimes a situation emerges in the classroom and you're like, I'm not sure how to deal with this. So in that moment, I wonder how it is that you, whether overtly
Mm.
or within yourself, experience or manage or speak to this maybe sense of vulnerability or humanness. And actually, especially with children, how do you balance vulnerability with being the teacher, being professional?
Yeah, it's hard. It's something I'm still learning. I think especially it's a theme for this year where, you know, sometimes kids can be very rude, very mean. They can say things to you that are very hurtful, even though you're the one who is there really trying to look out for them. They might, see you or behave as if you're the worst person, around, as if they don't like you, they don't want you around. They'll say, "Oh, you're a terrible teacher. I don't want you around. I don't like you. I just want to play. I don't want to learn anything from you." And or even worse things. And so I think that's the hard part there is one is, you see, okay, you like what you said, it's the adult part sees, okay, this is a child kind of being a child and showing you what's going on for them. But the other part is when they say things that trigger your own unresolved wounds. And I think that's a big part of the process of working with kids. They will and do tend to bring up all your unresolved stuff from that age, that, that from for you as a child. And I've had to work a lot on those things in therapy. Seeing what kids are bringing up for me, and even otherwise myself, just recognizing. I think the first thing is recognizing when, I guess, holding this dual awareness of, okay, inside I'm feeling really hurt right now. I can feel this child inside really hurting, but I'm still here as a teacher and I have to hold space. I have to manage the classroom. I think recently, how I've been approaching that is I remind myself that I'm not Superman and it's not my role and job to be Superman. I'm already doing a lot to show up with kindness for the kids. And if I'm very triggered in the moment, I don't necessarily have to still be super kind and compassionate. I can step back a bit, I can take space, and I can kind of, I think part of it is also letting kids know, teaching kids. Kids don't understand boundaries. They need to be taught when something they have done is maybe hurtful to someone or crossed a line. And so sometimes I'll let them know that, hey, the thing you said, it's quite hurtful to me. And right now, I'm not going to teach you, and we're not going to continue the class if you continue behaving this way. And I'll give them a choice. You can continue playing outside, and that's fine. But if you want to learn, you need to cooperate with me now. And I'm still here on your side. But right now, I'm going to go take some space. But yeah, it can feel very tender. And when you're in the thick of it, we do small classes, 3, 4 kids, but even so, there's a lot to manage. And yeah, it really takes a lot of, I guess, self-awareness and work to do that. But I think what helps also is having a team. So like I'll always have at least 1 or 2 teaching assistants, and it helps when you have different personalities in the room, because maybe one particular child triggers me a lot but doesn't trigger someone else in the same way, and vice versa. Maybe it's very easy for me to show up for some kids, whereas other teachers just cannot handle that. So I think that helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it is a tough role that you play.
Mm.
it's not just one of those things that's a job, right? You can just like
Mm.
switch it off, go home, and forget all about it. A lot of it is very much, connecting you on a deeper level through your inner child and whatever it's bringing up for you. How do you ensure, how are there any practices of self-care that prevent any burnout, since this is something that this is your work, right? Like you're navigating emotions and you're navigating how to be professional in the spaces that you hold. So yeah, how do you take care of yourself?
I guess few things. For one, I think the way our space is designed, we typically will have one room where the kids are learning, working, and we'll have another common space outside, which is a separate room with soft lighting and stuff. So if I need a break, I can just step outside. I can still hear what the kids are doing, but I can just sit down outside on some soft cushions in the warm lighting and just you can just take a few breaths, just relax a bit, maybe use the bathroom. My therapist will teach me, like she's given me some somatic practices I can do, very simple ones, just I guess try to down regulate a bit, feel a bit, connect back to the body a bit. And I think other things are kind of how I plan the classes out. I'll always keep some space between classes. I won't go back to back to back. Typically I just teach one or two classes in a day, not more than that. But yeah, it's still a work in progress. It's still something I'm trying to figure out. But I think having good teaching assistants really helps, because if I need a break, then I know I can step out and do that. Yeah.
Something that you said earlier really hit home. It's in the context of my relationship. And I think it was when you said when a child is being difficult, a student is being difficult, you are bringing voice to them that this is actually not okay and it's hurtful and I do need to take care of myself. And the way you do it, Adi, it's so like it's really taking care of them as well as yourself at the same time. When you say, I'm still on your side, I'm just going to take some space for myself. It, to me, it models the importance of regulation. Like it shows kids that, hey, it's safe to take care of yourself, to call, to ask for a time out when that's necessary. And at the same time, you're not abandoning them. You're not making them wrong or feel bad or to take responsibility for how you feel. Instead, you are just sharing what is going on in your inner world, which is being vulnerable. And then you're also asking for space. I wonder if you have like what is the impact of doing this that you've maybe seen from either relationships, whether it's with your wife or with the children.
Mm. Yeah, I guess I'll speak more about in my own relationship first. Um, I think a lot of the stuff I do with the kids, it's stuff I've practiced and honed more at home first. There's this thing I read just a couple of months back actually that really hit home and was very supportive for me, which said, so, basically in say respectful education or respectful parenting, which is basically all the stuff that we're talking about, where you try to show up for kids in a more emotionally healthy way. There is one issue with that, which is we're trying to kind of suddenly break generations of patterns of, I guess, unhealthy patterns, right? So typically each generation will try to do a bit better than what their parents did. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to do a full 180 turn. We're trying to do like way better. We're trying to completely rewrite the books and show up in a completely different way with these kids, whether as an educator or parent, than what we received or the previous generations received, which is very noble in its intention. But the issue that can come up is if we've not done our own inner work enough, when say a child is having a tantrum or they're giving you a very hard time, and you still try to be calm, regulated, still, hold that space for them, your own inner child inside is going to feel, huh, this again, like someone else's needs are more important than mine, and I'm feeling terrible here, but no one is here with me. And that inner child the pattern just repeats, and that inner child can feel re-traumatized and everything. And when I read that, it really hit home for me, because it can be very stressful for me teaching kids sometimes and holding space in that way. And I think hearing that really hit home as to why it can be so stressful. Because there's this whole part, there's so much tension inside me that was not getting met. And so now what I do, say in my own relationship, if say I triggered and I sense that there's this part inside that is feeling like he needs to be the most important person because he needs care, then I'll take space. I'll say, hey, right now I need to take some space first. I see you're hurting. I'm gonna go be with myself and I'll come back to you later. And that really helps. And it's a very big win-win because once I'm able to hold space for myself, I'm a lot more grounded, calmer, and I can come back and show up in a more authentic way rather than because when there's so much tension and stress inside, the way we're showing up is kind of, I just want to fix this situation right now because it's so unpleasant for me. It's unpleasant for you. Can you just fix it? And no child wants to be fixed, right? No one wants to be fixed when they're hurting. And it can be hard to learn that it's a new pattern of, okay, I'm going to go take space. But what if when I come back, the person doesn't want me anymore? There's all those things to work through. And I guess it's a muscle also to practice. But I have found that it makes very big difference for me and the other person. And in doing that, I don't make the other person responsible for dealing with my child there.
Wow, I feel like everything that you've shared thus far about, your experiences working with these kids and how you're taking care of yourself, your inner child, all that's very much applicable to day-to-day space holding,
Mm-hmm.
like and personal space holding. It's really not just limited to the spaces like within the four walls, right? I'm curious, how do you see the landscape of space holding in the future? And what potential challenges or opportunities do you participate?
I think what you pointed out about it's not just about kids, right? It's about day to day. I think the reason for that is because kids and adults will respond or maybe feel in a similar way. It's just that kids will not mask it. Adults are very good at masking and suppressing and have practiced it for, decades and decades. So they're very good at it. But if you really want to connect with someone, it still is, really speaking to that core inside part of them, really making them feel validated and heard. So actually, like, for a long time, I wanted to start working with parents, educators, host circles with them, host workshops, share a bit of my insights. It's the end of last year when I was going to push out my first circle. I realized that a lot of my own so I'm not a parent, but a lot of my own learnings about how to show up with kids came from all this inner child work, relationship work with my wife. And that's what's helped me connect with kids better. And so when I started putting out my circles and workshops, I realized actually it's not just for parents and educators. And so half the people who come typically are just young adults, maybe not even married, maybe single, maybe dating or not. And the other half might be educators, parents. But it's really this, I think that universal thread is how do you connect with another human being and yourself in a conscious way for real. Yeah.
Definitely. And on that note, I wonder if there is maybe a daily practice that you do, or maybe just any guiding principle or mantra that encapsulates your approach to space holding or supports you or resources you before you hold space or in line with, you know, space holding as your vocation.
Mm, gosh, there isn't one in particular at the moment, but I think what helps me when I'm struggling is remembering the thing that I mentioned some time back, that it's not that they're giving me a hard time, but they're having a hard time. And I think at the first layer, it can help just it helps us kind of show up differently. The energy and intention with which we show up shifts. Yeah. And the person can feel that, if they feel like, hey, okay, then they feel like, hey, they're on my side, rather than they're frustrated with me for being upset. But I will caveat that it doesn't always it's not always as simple. Sometimes you have to go through a few layers, a few mini explosions almost, a few ruptures to get to that core vulnerability. Because even though the person might be having a hard time, they're not going to directly show you that vulnerable side. The first layers that will come out will always be the rage, the blame, the frustration. And as you can kind of do this dance together to get through those layers, eventually you will probably reach that vulnerable side and find safety together.
Amazing, Adi. As we close out, do you have any parting words? Just like a few words of wisdom that you can share.
I guess a very simple thing I guess I wish to see from more people is when someone else is talking, especially about something they're not feeling good about, or just in general, I guess I just wish people would pause a bit more before responding. Yeah, just pause, let it sit, let what the person said sit a bit, and then respond. Yeah.
That's actually listening, right?
Mm,
I feel like it's so simple yet so important and so
yeah,
appreciated.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
like, do we
That's real.
listen to listen or do we listen to respond?
Yes. Yes, exactly. Wow. Thank you so much, Adi. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your wisdom and your experiences with us. And I'm sure our listeners um, will learn or have learned so much from this episode.